Hi, family. This is Christopher Heron, longtime member of the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I'd like to introduce one of the success stories of the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church. She's a professional classical musician. She's worked on films, theater productions, and major musical presentations. Recently, in 2023, she was part of a cast of an all-Black classical orchestra that performed in Toronto, Ontario, called Tremonisha. I'm speaking of none other than Lena Fankhauser. Get ready for my one-on-one conversation with a remarkable woman. Okay, so let's begin by speaking about growing up in Montreal in general and your experiences at the Westmount SDA Church and even at Greaves Academy. What do you remember about those childhood experiences?
Well, it was fantastic. Those Sabbats were just great in that grand church in that space, which was kind of like a grand hall, actually. Fantastic acoustic for musicians. Great organ playing, just great music, great fellowship. I just remember that so much, and having been training since I'm 4,
Yes.
first on violin for many years, and then switched to viola. That was almost like my training grounds, actually. Just performing. I think I didn't realize it as a kid, but the amount of times I've played up there on that stage, up to this day, has just given me just a calming feeling when I'm on stage. Um, and while I was at church, so the whole community aspect, and just the opportunity, which I think, once again, at that age, all of us just actually didn't even realize exactly what was going on until later on in life.
You're right in saying that it was a training ground for so many musicians and vocalists. But what was so unique about your experience was that you, in turn, introduced classical music to the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Yeah.
Did you realize that your music was different, that your instrument was different from what we were accustomed to at the Westmount Church?
I think, yes, obviously I was aware that I was playing a rare instrument, and we were the only ones, or one of the very few, that were in the classical world.
Yes.
And the interesting about it is that afterwards I realized how much the diversity at Westmount had made an impression on me, because out there in the world, in the classical music world, of course, and I am very involved in trying to change the face of classical music, in terms of diversity. But there, we were there with our community, and so, music had no color. So I think it was interesting, as I started to grow up and get out into the workforce and see, like, where is everybody? I'm the only one left here. Um, so I think, in a way, it was a really unique experience compared to, I would say, a lot of my colleagues who didn't have that diverse kind of background, because the concert stage and concert hall still, unfortunately, are not where we would like them to be as far as diversity is concerned.
That's interesting. Yet, in spite of the fact that you were unique, you expressed such a confidence when you were on your violin. And I wanted to know, was that confidence also in part playing frequently, all too frequently, in the Westmount Church with your brother, who was the cellist? Was that because being a dynamic duo was doubly impactful?
Yeah, I think that, my mother being Trinidadian, I mean, a lot of people watching this will know my mother, Heather. She is, once you've met her, you know what I mean. A very powerful lady and woman, and inspiration to us all, and has been, up to this day, extremely active in the church. Both of my parents, both Heather and Peter, been an inspiration to us all, and such a support, such a strong pillar of encouragement. Also for my brother and I, they invested so much time and effort, make sure that we had our lessons, just provided the tools that we needed to be able to do what we did. And I think that that I think a lot of it, that calmness and that confidence came a lot from my parents' support, as well as, my mom used to say, the Trinidadian accent. There is no such word as nervous. You know, she just got that right out of my vocabulary early on, and I think the support of the church, just in general, also of the church members. I remember all those hymns that we would play, and then add variations to them on Amazing Grace, amongst others. So I think it was also interesting because we were being classically trained, but however, we were still sort of mixing the gospel elements with it. So that was always really interesting.
Growing up at the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church
Mm-hmm.
as a child, what struck me outside of the walls of the Westmount Church was the fact that it was a predominantly Caribbean church. Yet you presented a refreshing and a unique face to the church, being a biracial, your parents being a biracial couple. Did you already, even in that context, sense that you were living a very unique and distinctive life from others, being with your mother being Trinidadian and your father being German Swiss?
Yeah, that's also interesting because I think, again, at the time, as a child, you're just in some ways somewhat oblivious to a lot of things. I think, and probably it's a good thing, because when you look back and you think, wow, this is really, we were one of the few, we were standing out, we were doing something different. At the time, it seemed kind of normal to us. And I know my father, Swiss, was one of the few sort of white males in the room, often at all of the socials and functions. But for me, it was, my dad, and my parents were my parents, and that just was just kind of, I think we didn't even really think about it much at the time, and we were just part of this community that was such a strong community that provided so much support, and that was our world.
Hmm. I'm curious to know, because we've all, from our years at the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church, have in one way or another been affected spiritually by the sermons, by the lesson studies, the Bible studies, and just by our interaction with other people who believed in God. How would you say Westmount, the church, and the overall Seventh-day Adventist experience affected your worldview of religion and of spirituality?
Yeah, well, in a huge way. I mean, it was a major part of our life. And again, my parents being very active, we were really involved in so many activities and Sabbath school, and all of those special things that we were doing. So it's a huge part of our life, and it really has been a foundation, and I would say that for us all. And that's something that you will always have, you always carry with you. It doesn't matter which part of the world you live in, where you move to. And those years were so fundamental to all of us and to who we are today. And I think those lessons that we've learned then, they have carried throughout.
I'm going to conclude by asking you, just out of curiosity and fun, what are 2 or 3 very memorable experiences that you can recall going to the Westmount Seventh-day Adventist Church, whether it was a personality, whether it was a sermon, just an encounter maybe?
Yeah, that's really difficult because there were so many. I was always fascinated as a kid with the baptisms.
Okay.
I just have these, when they just brought the sort of pool situation
Yes.
on stage, I just couldn't believe it. That for me was just so ingrained in my head as something that is a miracle.
Okay.
Because from a child's perspective, and I just remember those baptisms so vividly, as if it were yesterday. I'm assuming they're still doing them there.
Yes, I do believe they are. But
Just absolutely.
it's interesting you mention it, because it's true. When I recollect on some of the very impressionable experiences, one was my personal baptism that I had with my mother in that baptismal pool. I remember where I was positioned. I remember the lighting. I remember it was towards the end of a crusade, all of that.
Yes. Another person who we'll all never forget, I believe her name was Mrs. Greaves, was it?
Yes, there was a Sister Greaves.
Yeah, who I think is no longer with us, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. She is somebody that I will never forget, just her presence.
Okay.
Um, in the front, generally in the front part of the church. And another impression, of course, were the choirs.
Okay.
A youth choir.
Yes.
Loved the youth choir, and again, I was so fascinated with all the gospel chords. You know, being a musician and really understanding music,
Yes.
and yet hearing music where it's just, you know, sometimes someone would have a solo, so it wasn't written always. It was just this idea of freedom, and not always, you know, playing in a certain form or within a score. That was always fascinating for me. Also, just the on the keyboards, or whether it was the organ, the accompaniment. I just remember that so well.
That is fascinating. I don't remember, but did you ever sing in any of the choirs?
I think I did for a short period of time,
Okay.
but I think my brother might have as well. Um, but you know, Jubilee, is that what they were called? Choir, also the kids choir. Yeah, just
The kids' choir was the Joy Bells.
or Joy Bells, not Jubilee. Joy Bells.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah, this was, you know, just fantastic. You know, and
Right.
so actually, I enjoyed church a lot for the music,
Yes.
even
Yes.
though I'm a musician, obviously, because I got to hear music that I don't get to hear when I go to work, or when I'm, you know, when I'm training, I'm listening to Mozart and other things. In another style. So that was always fascinating to me. And again, it's like this fantastic concert hall. Now that I live in Vienna and I play in all these halls and I see all these places all over the world, Westmount Church is just a fascinating building and a fascinating space.
Well, Lena, it has been such a pleasure to speak with you for a few moments. And thank you for your candor and for bringing us back to some very memorable times.
Thank you so much, Christopher.
All right. And I hope to see you in October.
Yes, I hope I can make it.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Thank you. Ciao,
Bye-bye.
ciao.